In today's video, we're back with some more NHL trade rumors, mostly talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Ottawa Senators. And that's coming up next. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams, so if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, today we're coming back to talk about some more NHL trade rumors. Now there hasn't been a whole lot in the rumor mill here over the past week or so, but now there's some things that are kind of coming up here again as the season is beginning to open, mostly around the Toronto Maple Leafs, where they do have a lot of tough decisions to be made here in the coming days and weeks for their roster for the 18-19 season. Obviously, William Nylander is still not signed. He's a restricted RFA, and right now is holding on to services until a contract is put in place with the Leafs. Obviously, because of the lack of contracts and the fact he's not in the lineup, there's obviously a lot of rumors circulating about William Nylander now. So I wanted to discuss some thoughts on how I think this could play out and how this could impact the team long term. Now, obviously, there's been lots of rumors about Nylander per se, and Dubas maybe having conversations about Nylander. I know Kyle Dubas has come out and said he's not shopping him, and I do believe him, but at the same time, you got to remember as well that even if he was, he's not going to state that publicly. We've heard numerous times GMs come out and say, I don't want to trade this guy, I'm not shopping him, and then, days or weeks later, out the door they go. Now, I'm not going to say, though, that I think Dubas is shopping him. I don't think he is. I do think the Leafs would prefer to have him signed on their roster, contributing to their team. At this point, though, I think the Leafs are a pretty strong forward group. They certainly have the ability to take their time with this, make sure they get it right, so they don't put themselves in an even worse cap situation than they could already possibly be presented with here in a few years' time, once all their youngsters kind of graduate into these big mega contracts that they're expected to get. Obviously, they signed John Tavares this past summer for $11 million. They got Marner and Matthews coming up that have to be done by next summer. So obviously, they have a lot of big decisions to be made and a lot of new contracts and big money ones at that to be handed out here between this year and next. Part of the speculation around William Nylander is that he's asking for way more than the Leafs are prepared to do. Both camps seem to be comfortable stating publicly here that they both are more interested in a long-term deal, and they don't really feel that a bridge deal is something they really want to explore, although it could be a way to get this compromised, get something shorter-term in place to get him back on the ice. But at this point, at least right now, it doesn't seem like either side's really overly interested in that. Now, there's been some reports indicating that Nylander is looking for anywhere from $8 to $8.5 million, something close to what the Leon Draisaitl contract is worth. And there's a lot of reports indicating the Leafs are more comfortable with, $6 to $7 million, something closer to the David Pastrnak contract. Now, at this point, if I had to ask you, would you pay William Nylander as much as David Pastrnak? I would think the answer probably would be no. Now, of course, the Leon Draisaitl contract right now doesn't look real great based on how Leon played last year. Now, there's still potential, I think, for him to grow into that deal. And that deal may very well look much better here in a year or so's time if he can rebound to the player that I think he's going to be. Because it appears the Nylander camp are using that as a comparable, that's probably causing a lot of the issues here. If you look at the other guys, like I said, like a David Pastrnak or a Nikolai Ehlers, those to me seem to be more comparable guys. They're making anywhere in that 6 to 6.5 range, and that seems to be, in my opinion, where Nylander would fall after a couple of solid years with the Leafs so far. So I guess because we really don't know 100% what the asking price is, I would have to say that it's more than likely it is 7 or more. It has to be, because I would think if the asking price from Nylander was around 6 to 6.5, 6.6, wouldn't you think that deal would already be done? I think it would be. So therefore, I do think the asking price is much higher, and obviously that's where the problems lie. As far as teams that would be inquiring on Nylander, there's probably quite a few. I'm sure Dubas is probably getting all kinds of phone calls. I know there was some speculation that the Carolina Hurricanes had reached out. But as far as what the Leafs would want back in return, if they ever do make the deal here to trade him, they're going to want a fairly top defenseman back in return. That's their glaring need on their team right now. However, I really do think their preference would be to sign him and to not trade him. But obviously, because of the lack of the contract, there's certainly all kinds of fuel on the fire here, and speculations running rampant of what could happen with William Nylander. Another big problem here, this Nylander contract, is it's going to potentially set a tone for what they may end up having to pay guys like Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews. Obviously, with Matthews and Marner both potentially set here to have big years for the Leafs, and they do have the time to take to let this play out for them. If they end up having monster years, hitting 100-plus points, and they end up having to deal with those contracts next year, then obviously, they could end up paying them potentially even more than what people were discussing this past offseason. You throw in a William Nylander contract, potentially around $7 or $8 million as well, And, obviously that's going to create a lot of money tied up in very few guys. So my question to you, especially if you're a Leafs fan, would you be comfortable with the Leafs paying Nylander $7 to $8 million? And are you comfortable with having that much money potentially tied up here in very few players? I mean, it could create an atmosphere where they can possibly win a Stanley Cup here relatively short term, but at the same time, it could create a real cap crunch here for many years to come. So let's just take a look at the real hard math and numbers to tell you why I don't think it's quite sustainable for them to have this many guys under contract with that much money. You've got John Tavares already making $11 million. If you give Nylander 7 or 8, even if it ends up being closer to 7, either way, you have that on your books. Now, you got Austin Matthews likely going to command the same amount of money as Tavares, potentially more. I know I've seen speculation that it's going to be more, but I mean, I think it's safe to say it won't be less anyways. And if Mitch Marner has a monster year like a lot of people are predicting, he could end up 90 to 100 points this year, and he could easily be looking at 9 to 10 million as well. I mean, really, if Tavares is going to be paid 11, and if they come up with similar point totals, I can see Marner looking for similar money too. So really, you have the possibility, it really does exist, to have, potentially $40 to $42 million tied up in 4 forwards. That's a lot of money. That's over half your salary cap in 4 guys, and then they're all forwards. You throw in Freddie Anderson, who's obviously a pretty good goaltender, under contract here for a few more years yet at $5 million. You have a couple of defensemen under contract longer term, like Riley and Zaitsev. Riley's making $5 million right now for the next number of years. Zaitsev's making $4.5 million. So there's $9.5 million in your top highest paid defenseman. You get Jake Gardiner as a pending UFA, and right now he needs an extension for next year if they're going to keep him as well. So obviously I know there's a bit of a love-hate relationship between Gardiner and the Leafs. A lot of different opinions out there. You can say what you want about him, but he does produce a lot of offense, and he is, I think, really worth keeping around. And he's likely is going to command a $6 to $7 million contract if he hits the open market as a free agent next summer. So when you take a look at all that and you add it all up here, you could have potentially 3 defensemen, 1 goaltender, and then those 4 forwards really tying up a ton of money. The only other forward you really get locked up longer term was Kadri, which is a very reasonable contract. That one is really well at $4.5 million. So the potential exists if they get Nylander signed for this amount of money, along with the other things that are expected to happen here. Let's say Gardner stays around 6 or 7. You get Matthews and Marner's where they're expected to be. You could have upwards of about $66 million tied up in 9 players. That's an awful lot of money. Normally you carry 22 to 23 guys on your roster. So obviously that leaves around 13 to 14 players, to pay with the remaining cap money, which you're looking at around $14 million as of right now. Yes, the cap will go up. I get that. But if you take a look at the cap situation here and what we've seen in increases over the years, it's not guaranteed to go up incrementally every year. It could be very minimal or flat increases. If you get that a couple times here in the next 4, 5, 6 years, especially with the potential lockout looming here in a couple of years' time, and you don't see the cap increases, you could potentially have a situation where you have 13 to 14 players that you have to pay, and you only have like around $1 million or more to pay them each, which really isn't a lot. So you're looking at about 13 to 14 rookie type contract, or your 1 year, $1 million type veteran type deals that you often see in the NHL. That to me is not sustainable. So I don't think they're going to keep this full band together. It's just a matter of who has to go, and between Nylander or Gardner or somebody there, there's a contract that's going to have to give. And so it does make sense that either Gardner doesn't come back next year or Nylander does get traded. Now, I know it seems to be within the Leaf land that, the whole we can and we will, and Dubas has it all figured out, and that's all great, and maybe he'll figure this out. But from my perspective, it just doesn't seem realistic that they can keep everybody together and give them the increases that they're likely going to be looking for, unless they all kind of take a bit of a hometown discount here and say, you know what, I love playing in Toronto, I want to win, I feel I have a mega opportunity to win year after year for a long time, and they'll take a smaller amount to stay there. So the hometown discount's really going to be the main way they can possibly keep this together. So I guess when it comes back to the trade rumors, it makes sense that the Leafs would likely have to trade either a Gardner or a Nylander to make some room here for a longer term to kind of make things balance out a little bit better. I mean, you can't always have 13 or 14 rookies in your lineup, making around $900,000 to $1 million. That's just not sustainable in my opinion. But that's just me. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think here? Do you think it's likely that they can keep this full band together, or are we going to see a few guys, potential Nylander being one of them, be traded here sooner than later? Now, staying with the Leafs here momentarily, they do also have a few other tough decisions to make. Big ones in goal. They do have a good problem right now, is they have a lot of capable goaltenders. Obviously, Freddie Andersen's the main starter. That's not going to change. The big role here that was being determined was his backup. It looks as though they might be keeping Curtis McElhinney, who really, up until the time he joined the Leafs, was a little bit of a journeyman goalie, bounced around a lot, was okay, but really not stellar. But since he's been with Toronto, he's been exceptional as a backup, arguably the best or one of the best backup goaltenders in the league during his tenure with the Leafs. So with that in mind, if they decide to stick with what they call the safe bet here, since they know what they're getting, and then they still have Calvin Pickard, and they still have Garrett Sparks, the American Hockey League Goalie of the Year last year, to have to clear through waivers to go back to the American Hockey League. I think it's a possibility one or both of those guys would get claimed if that were to happen. Now, obviously, they could carry 3 goaltenders short term. That's a possibility, but one of them at least has to go through waivers here over the next couple of days unless they make a trade. So could we see the Leafs trade a goaltender sooner than later before opening night here? I think it's a real possibility because I think they're smart enough to know they're a high risk to lose whoever goes through the waiver wire. I mean, Pickard maybe can squeak through and go to the Marlies. That's a possibility. But Sparks, I think, would be snagged. You know, Sparks is only 25 years old. The American Hockey League Goalie of the Year was a big reason why they won the Calder Cup last year. I think he's got the most potential amongst those guys longer term. So I think if Sparks were to go through waivers, he would get nabbed. So therefore, I think the possibility does really exist that we're going to see them maybe trade him sometime soon. Now, the same thing goes for defenseman Connor Carrick, who's having a tough time cracking this lineup here over the past couple of years. And I do think there's a real possibility he's basically a spare part that they very well could move him on as well. I mean, outside of Carrick, they've still got lots of other guys who have proven they can have a shot at an opportunity here at the NHL. You know, you've got Travis Dermott, you've got Justin Hall, you've got Calle Rosen, you've got Andreas Borgman, you got Liljegren on the way up, you got Ozhiganov that they just brought over. Like, they have a lot of younger defensemen who can fill those, 5, 6, 7 roles. Carrick, to me, seems like an odd man out, and seems like he could probably go off and potentially get a more regular spot on another roster. So I do think the Leafs have some tough decisions to make here soon, and I do think there's a real possibility that we could see guys like Carrot or Sparks or Pickard or a combination of all those guys potentially moved here short term. Obviously, the Nylander situation is the big looming, question mark that they need to get figured out more than anything. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to see a Nylander trade here immediately. I think they probably would rather get him signed and get into the lineup. But I just think longer term it's going to be a lot more difficult than a lot of people realize or what they're expressing publicly here to keep this full roster together. And that sometime, whether it not be this year or next season or sometime here in the future, I do think the possibility really does exist that one of those bigger contracts are going to have to go. Now, I also want to touch base quickly on a couple of the Ottawa Senators players, obviously, that are under the rumor mill as well. Because of, again, lack of contract, this is what generates a lot of talk around NHL circles and potential of players being dealt or not dealt. It was when they're not signed long term. So one of those guys, obviously, is Mark Stone. There's been a lot of talk around him lately. I know I've seen speculation around the Avalanche and, of course, Vegas. Vegas always seems to be in the mix with a lot of bigger names. I'm not sure about Vegas right now, to be honest. After signing Stastny and trading for Pacioretty, they very well could make a big move to acquire another winger. I'm not going to rule out that possibility completely, but if you take a look at the fact they've already traded Nick Suzuki, to get Pacioretty, not really sure they're going to want to give up much more of their prospect depth here, but they do have some promising young defensemen that showed in training camp, like Hag and Brandstrom. Obviously, they still got Cody Glass. They still have lots of draft picks as well. So, could they make a move? It's certainly a possibility, but if the Senators did decide to move Stone, to me, the better choice would be to try to move that to Colorado, and maybe they can get their first-round draft pick back. Now, of course, I'm sure the Avs would be reluctant to do that today. They would probably prefer to sit back and see how this plays out. And if it's looking like the Sens will be near the bottom of the league and have a shot at that number 1 pick, as much as they would probably love to have Mark Stone, they would probably really love to have Jack Hughes more. So, obviously, that is something that's going to be a wait and see. But if it's looking like they'd be high enough that pick might only be, I think it's probably safe to say it'd be a top 10 pick. But, whether or not it's, number 7, 8, 9, 6, something along those lines, obviously there's no guarantees with the lottery. But if they're not pretty much a lock to be, 30th or 31st, I think the possibility does exist that they could make a move with the Avs to try to get that first-round pick back. And that Stone would be the ideal candidate to help make that happen. As much as the Sens do like Stone and could possibly build around him as a future captain, again, I think if the possibility existed to have him or Jack Hughes, I know which one they're going to select here. Well, that's all the news and rumors we're going to discuss here for today. Of course, I want to hear your comments like I already asked. What are your thoughts around all the possibilities here that we discussed today? Could we possibly see the Avs make a move with that first round pick that belongs to Ottawa back in return for a top guy? Are we going to see some moves out of the Leafs? They obviously have a lot of tough decisions to make, and it's just a matter of time here before some of it we see, some of it longer term based on what we discussed today as well. So I'd like to hear your comments to see what you think they're going to do to help manage this situation. If you're new to the channel here, I hope you consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams, and there's plenty of content here for all hockey fans to enjoy. So if you're new, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button as well. I'd really appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We will catch you next time.